Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. She agreed to be a mother for a day, but she stayed forever. One winter morning, in the company's large glass and steel hall, Langford & Co. The pale neon light reflected off the icy marble floor tiles. The air smelled of burnt coffee, expensive perfume, and stifled ambitions. Everything seemed calculated, fast, methodical. Sitting alone on a black leather bench, a 6-year-old boy dangled his legs in the air, his worn soles barely touching the floor. He wore a slightly oversized navy coat, a yellow scarf that hung to the floor, and a carefully knitted hat. His name was Jake Miller. His light brown hair fell in soft strands from under his cap, and his large, curious, and serious blue eyes scrutinized with almost painful intensity every adult who passed by. All in a hurry, all in suits, all too busy to pay him any attention. Jake held a drawing in his small hands, carefully folded, a little crumpled from waiting. It showed two figures, a small one, with a broad smile, holding the hand of a tall woman with tied-back brown hair and wearing a suit. On his chest, a badge. Above it, in clumsy but careful letters, he had written, "My mom for today." He glanced at the large wall clock. The hands moved forward, relentless. He clutched his drawing a little tighter. And suddenly, the main elevator door opened with a metallic clink. The sound of clicking heels echoed through the hall, imposing silence. Victoria Langford had just entered. Founder and CEO of the Langford & Co. empire, she rarely appeared on site. But when she did, everything stopped. Conversations trailed off. Shoulders straightened. Even the air seemed to stand straighter. Tall and slender, she wore a long, perfectly fitted black wool coat, leather gloves, and a white gold watch that shone discreetly on her wrist. Her brown hair, impeccably styled in a bun, revealed an angular, severe face of cold beauty. No smile, no distraction from her expression. She strode forward, escorted by a silent assistant and a fixed gaze. She was about to cross the hall without a word, like a queen crossing a field of pawns, when a thin voice rose, breaking the silence. "Madam. Can you be my mom for today?" She stopped. Suddenly. A sudden, unexpected stop. Around her, the frozen employees held their breath. Even the coffee machines seemed to stop humming. Victoria slowly lowered her eyes, as if checking that the voice was indeed coming from the tiny little being standing in front of her. He looked her straight in the eyes, fearless, with the disarming innocence of a child with nothing to lose. His drawing in one hand, the other already slightly extended towards her, as if inviting her. Victoria, surprised, blinked and hesitated. Then she answered, in a tone more abrupt than she intended. "What did you say?" Jake, without flinching, repeated calmly, articulating better. "Today is Parents' Day at school. And I don't have a mom. So I thought maybe you'd be okay with it. Just for today." A quiet murmur ran through the surrounding employees. At that moment, a man appeared from the corridor on the right, visibly distraught. His hair was disheveled, his suit slightly wrinkled. "Jake! What are you doing?" he exclaimed, striding forward. "I'm sorry, madam, he's a little dreamy sometimes. He didn't mean to disturb you." He leaned forward to grab his son's hand, embarrassed, but he took a step back, his eyes still fixed on Victoria. Victoria didn't move. Her gaze shifted from father to child, then back to Jake, as if trying to understand what had just happened. David Miller, Jake's father, was a modest but well-groomed man in his 40s. He wore a sky-blue shirt, wool trousers that were a little worn at the knees, and a tie that hung slightly askew, evidence of a rushed morning. He worked as on accountant on the 14th floor of this same tower, since now 4 years. Always punctual, always polite, he never attracted attention beyond his office. He never spoke of his private life, much less of his pain. For David was widower. For 3 years. His wife, Emily, had died suddenly in a car accident when Jake was only 3 years old. Since then, David had done everything he could to be a present, gentle, and solid father. But that day, he hadn't been able to free himself, and Jake had invented a solution. Victoria stared at him. A long, piercing, almost clinical gaze. She seemed to be dissecting the man in front of her. Not to judge him, but to understand him. A lonely, self-effacing man. And this son, who had the audacity to speak to her. "Is this your son?" she asked, her voice calm, almost icy. David nodded, embarrassed. "Yes, and I'm really sorry. He's had this idea in his head since yesterday. He overheard me talking about an important meeting with the boss, and I think he chose you." He tried to smile, but it was a painful smile. Half apology, half shame. He placed a protective hand on Jake's shoulder, as if to steady him, but not quite pull him back. Victoria looked down at the child. Jake held her gaze. Without trembling. It was this gaze that unsettled her the most. This frank, honest, pure gaze, which asked for nothing more than a yes. She didn't see any whim. Or manipulation. Only immense solitude, disguised under a simple request. "You want me to be your mom for a day," she repeated, more to herself than to the child. She knelt slowly. The silence in the lobby was complete. Even the receptionists had stopped typing on their keyboards. "And why me?" Jake shrugged, as if the answer was obvious. "Because you look like you can do anything. Even this." This sentence, so simple, touched something very old in her. A hidden wound. Victoria Langford hadn't grown up surrounded by love. Orphaned at a young age, bounced from foster home to foster home, she had learned to survive on her own. She had built a shell of mastery, prestige, and excellence. We feared her. We admired her. But we didn't love her. Not really. And she had always been comfortable with it. Until this little boy made her an offer she couldn't ignore. She felt something crack, very faintly, inside her. His face, frozen like a sculpture, relaxed. A smile, discreet, almost imperceptible, was born on his lips. And to everyone's astonishment, she straightened up, mechanically dusted off her coat, then declared. "Very well. One day." David stared at her, frozen. "Pardon?" "I said, okay. But I'm warning you, Jake," she said, addressing the child again, "I don't really know what it means to be a mom." Jake tilted his head, his gaze still gentle, and answered with disarming sincerity. "I don't know what it's like to have one either. So shall we learn together?" An emotional silence fell. Several employees, who were pretending to read files, had misty eyes. Victoria closed her eyes for a second, as if inwardly validating a momentous decision. Then she reached out to Jake. "All right. When do we start?" Jake almost jumped for joy. He slipped his small hand into hers. It was the first time in a long time that Victoria had held someone's hand. David, stunned, didn't know what to say. He tried to open his mouth, perhaps to protest, but the words stuck. And Victoria added, turning briefly towards him. "I'll bring it back to you tonight. In full. I promise." Then she walked away, hand in hand with Jake, towards the glass doors of the lobby. The employees stared at this surreal scene, mouths agape, as if a glacier had melted before their eyes. And David, himself, remained there, frozen, his heart pounding, without yet understanding that his life, and that of his son, had just taken a irreversible turning point. Victoria Langford, a woman of power, accustomed to chauffeur-driven limousines and Italian leather seats, found herself that morning installed in the back seat of an old Toyota Pigs, with a dried juice stain on the door and a NASA Junior Explorer sticker stuck to the rear window. David, tense, glanced discreetly in the rearview mirror, trying to gauge what this woman he would never have imagined meeting was thinking except through a screen or an internal note. Jake, on the other hand, kept talking. "Let's go to my classroom first. We're in the giraffe room. You'll see, my teacher is nice but a little weird. And there's also Ethan who always eats his detention. Victoria nodded, a little taken aback by the outpouring of energy. This wasn't her world. She didn't know what to make of this pure excitement, this spontaneity. She glanced at her meeting notifications, which were piling up on her phone. She turned off the screen. And for the first time in a long time, she decided to let others manage without her. When they arrived at the school, a small, colorful building with walls covered in children's drawings, Victoria felt a strange sensation, a sort of timid warmth mixed with apprehension. They walked through the glass doors, and a mixture of odors immediately wrapped it up: white glue, markers, butter cookies and jam. She saw moms chatting around a cupcake stand, clumsy dads holding mugs of lukewarm coffee. She stood out, her presence imposed silence as she passed. Her strict silhouette in her dark coat, her impeccable posture, her flawless makeup, all of it screamed foreign. She looked like a painting accidentally hung in a nursery. "More Jake," he shone. He grabbed her hand without asking permission, and led her like a guide into his miniature kingdom. "She's Mrs. Langford. But you can call her Victoria, because she's like my mom today." The children immediately surrounded him, curious. "She's pretty. Is this your real mom? She has shiny shoes." Victoria, stiff at first, relaxed without realizing it. She smiled. Even laughed when Jake mimicked her CEO gait while holding a cardboard name tag: "I'm Victoria Langford and I run the entire universe." He showed her his desk, his drawings, including one where she had a superheroine cape, and presented him with a small robot that he had built with straws and tape. Then, with a solemn gesture, he handed it to Hera. "Paper flower. Yellow. Crumpled. Beautiful. This is for you, Mom, for a day." She took the flower. A strange ball formed in her throat. Something cracked softly, silently, inside her. An emotion she thought was foreign to her nature. She, who had never cried upon signing a contract. Who had not paid no tears upon the death of his last adoptive parent. There, in that classroom that smelled of sugar and worn markers, a tear threatened to fall. After school, Jake insisted on extending the mission. They went shopping. Ice cream in a small local stand. "What flavor do you want?" he asked, his eyes shining. Victoria replied hesitantly. Vanilla. Classic." "Like you," he said, laughing. Then they went to the park. She sat on a bench, watching the other children. She didn't know what to do with her hands. She felt almost naked without her Hermes bag, her tablet, or her documents. Jake climbed onto a swing. He turned to her and asked, "Can you push me?" She approached, hesitated, and pushed gently. Then a little harder. And even harder. Jake laughed out loud. And, without realizing it, she too. She was laughing. Really. A light, almost timid laugh. As if it were the first time it had come out of her uncontrollably. They talked afterward, sitting in the still damp grass. He told her about his passion for the stars, his desire to become an astronaut, and his certainty that his mother, up there, could still see him. Victoria listened silently. Jake's every word stirred something deep within her. When she brought him home, the sun was beginning to set, tinting the street copper and gold. The house was modest. A simple lawn, a wooden porch, an old swing hanging from the tree in the garden. Nothing luxurious. But everything exuded love. David stepped out onto the doorstep, his eyes worried, but immediately reassured when he saw Jake running towards him, the paper flower in his hand. I don't know what to say. He's never been happier," he said, his throat tight. Victoria looked at him for a moment. She was going to say something neutral. A thank you, perhaps. But what came out, in a calm and unexpected tone, was, "Me neither." She turned on her heel, walking towards the car she had left on the corner. And for the first time in years, she didn't know exactly who she was becoming. But one thing was certain, she wanted to find out. The next morning, at 9 o'clock sharp, Victoria Langford crosses again the doors of the glass hall of Langford and Company. Dressed in a cream coat, softer than her usual sharp blacks, she looked different. She walked straight to the reception desk. "Has David Miller arrived?" The receptionist, confused, nodded shyly. Victoria thanked her, then went up to the 14th floor alone. The employees couldn't believe their eyes. The CEO, on foot, without an assistant, and with that discreet smile on her lips? She stopped in front of David's desk, who looked up in astonishment. "I just wanted to make sure Jake was okay after yesterday. It was intense, for everyone." David stammered a thank you, but she didn't stay. She left as quickly as she had come. But the day after tomorrow, she reappeared. This time it was no longer a simple verification. "He told me about the stars. He deserves to see them up close. I have 2 tickets to the space exhibit at the planetarium. If that's okay with you." David barely hesitated. Jake, on the other hand, literally jumped for joy. That evening, under the dome of the planetarium, the 3 of them spent a long time lying on beanbags, contemplating the sky projected on the ceiling. Victoria, looking up, felt for the first time in years the calm. A strange peace. As if she no longer had to prove anything to anyone. Jake whispered, looking at the constellation Orion. "Do you think my mom is here?" Victoria hesitated. Then she answered softly. "I think she's watching over you. And she's proud." The following Sunday, she was invited to dinner at their house. David had prepared spaghetti with tomato sauce, Jake's favorite recipe, he had said. The table was small, made of worn wood. 3 plates. An overfilled salad bowl. A carafe of water. Nothing fancy. But Victoria, sitting there, felt more at home than in the glass-walled boardrooms. Jake talked non-stop, his cheeks stained with sauce, a wild bang, a huge smile. He recounted his dreams of becoming an astronaut, his ideas for spaceships, his theories about the stars. Victoria listened, captivated. She laughed when he knocked over his drink, and was moved when he showed her a new drawing of the 3 of them in a rocket, with the names, Jake, Dad, Mom, Victoria. And that laugh, that little stifled laugh that escaped him in the middle of a mouthful, David noticed it. He looked up at her, surprised. And found himself thinking that he hadn't seen anything so beautiful for a long time. Little by little, a gentle and quiet routinite installs. Victoria sometimes picked Jake up for school in the morning, dropping him off with a thermos of hot chocolate she'd had prepared. In the evening, she'd just happen to pass by the house. Sometimes she'd help Jake with his homework, sit with him to build a cardboard model, or simply curl up with a book while he played. She began to smile at the office. Genuine, unexpected smiles. She congratulated her teams more often. Her tone had softened, as had her gaze. Jake, for his part, began to systematically draw families off 3 people: a tall female figure in high heels, a bearded man with a gentle smile, and him, always in the center. David, however, said nothing. But every day, at the hour when she usually arrived, he was watching, with his ears strained and his heart pounding. He listened to the sound of her car, the little knock on the door, or even the bell that she no longer needed to ring since they automatically invited her in. One evening, after reading Jake a story, Victoria sat on the edge of the bed for a while. The room was quiet. Only the soft light of a starry night light swirled across the ceiling. Jake looked up at her, his eyelids heavy. "Could you stay a little longer? I don't want it to be just today." These words, so simple, broke a barrier within her that she didn't even know she had built. She looked at him. In his bright, childlike eyes, there was no selfish expectation, no calculation. Just a raw, pure need for attachment. And total trust, offered unconditionally. She thought about her childhood. To homes with rough sheets. To rooms shared with strangers. To nights without stories, without kisses, without night lights. To this conviction that she had engraved in her heart as a principle of survival, not needing anyone. And yet, today, she felt the need for them. Of this imperfect house. Of this child's voice. Of this smell of tomato sauce, cheap laundry detergent, and human warmth. She brushed Jake's hair gently. Okay. I'll stay a little longer. Then, without warning, she added, in a whisper almost to herself. You know. I want it to be more than just today, too. That evening when she got home, she didn't go straight to her office. She sat down on the couch, took off her heels, and looked for a long time at the drawing Jake had slipped into her bag. 3 figures, hand in hand, standing under a starry sky. And for the first time in his life, she felt at home. The reception room of the Metropolitan Grand Hall shone brightly. The crystal chandeliers suspended at a dizzying height diffused a golden light, soft but dazzling. Dozens of round tables were set, with ivory tablecloths, silver cutlery, and sapphire-glazed glasses. The air smelled of white roses and vanilla, and the discreet orchestra installed in a corner played soft jazz, almost a whisper. That evening, Langford & Co. organized its very first charity gala dedicated to single-parent families. The initiative came from Victoria herself. She hadn't told anyone, but she had personally funded more than half of the scholarships awarded that night. Not for image. Not for the newspapers. But for to honor a little boy who had reached out to him a day she thought was ordinary. In a corner of the room, at the head table, Jake wore a navy blue suit, a slightly crooked bow tie and shoes that were too new. He was moving his legs impatiently. To his right, David, elegant in a charcoal gray suit, occasionally glanced toward Victoria, at the back of the stage, ready to enter. When the lights dimmed, and the spotlights came on, respectful silence went down into the room. Victoria Langford made his entrance. She wasn't wearing her usual structured dresses. That evening, she had chosen a deep green satin long dress, simple but luminous, with no jewelry other than a thin gold bracelet. Her hair, loose on her shoulders, added an unusual softness to her usually austere face. She walked to the lectern, calm and confident, and placed her hands on either side of the microphone. A few flashes popped. Then she spoke. Good evening. You're here tonight because of a cause that's now deeply close to my heart. But if you had told me, just a few months ago, that I'd be standing here talking about families, I would have laughed. A few discreet smiles in the room. For years, I believed that success meant domination. Being the first to open doors, and the last to close them. Being alone, strong, unshakable. I thought my solitude was a form of power. That owing nothing to anyone was my greatest victory. She paused. Her gaze sought his, Jake, who stared at her with wide eyes. And then one day, a little boy asked me a very simple question. He looked at me, the woman in a hurry, unapproachable, and said, "Do you want to be my mom for today?" Murmurs in the room. Fond smiles. Jake, for his part, shook his father's hand. That day, I said yes. Just for one day. But that day taught me everything. It erased years of loneliness in a few hours. Because what I thought was my greatest weakness. She stopped. Her voice vibrated slightly. Has proven to be my greatest strength. There was a light applause. But she didn't move, her eyes still fixed on Jake. Thanks to him, I learned to breathe differently. To speak without defense. To love without calculation. I discovered that one could belong to a family, even if it doesn't start with blood. She tilted her head, her eyes wet without wiping them. This gala has a name. Jake's. And everything I've become since that day, I owe it to him. Instead of returning to his place as planned, Victoria came down from the stage. Slowly. Her gaze never left Jake. The spotlight followed her. The guests murmured, touched by this unexpected, almost unreal scene. Arriving at the table, she knelt down. There, in front of this little 6-year-old boy, dressed like a prince, but trembling like a child who doesn't dare dream too much. She approached him and whispered in his ear, softly enough for only him to hear. "I'm not your mom for a day. I'm your mom forever. Jake stared at her, his lips parted. Then he burst into tears of happiness and jumped into his arms, squeezing his neck with all her might. She squeezed him too. For a long time. With that warmth she thought she could never give. David, standing behind them, his eyes filled with tears. He placed one hand on Victoria's shoulder, then extended the other. She took it without hesitation. And at that moment, they formed a perfect image, an image that nothing could have predicted, a woman who had built empires, a man who had loved in silence, and a child who had been able to reunite two broken hearts through the simple power of innocence. She came for one day, out of politeness. But she stayed forever, out of love. Because sometimes, it's not blood ties that define us, but the bonds of the heart.